Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We are going to start out with scripture this morning, and it's from Micah 6:6-8. With what shall I come before the Lord, and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So, humility is kind of the theme this morning. And the story behind this next song is quite interesting. The guy named Rich Mullins wrote this, and ever since he was a little child, he said he wanted to be poor, and he wanted to be a missionary. And it was a very strange thing for a child to say. His grandpa would be like, "No, you're going to make a lot of money when you're older." He said, "No, I'm going to be poor." And his grandpa said, "If you really love the poor people so much, then why don't you make a lot of money and then give it all to them?" He said, "Okay, I will." And so fast forward about 25 years later, he's working with youth groups, driving back and forth to youth camps. And some people say it was a youth camp in Tennessee, but other people say it was in Michigan. And I tend to like the Michigan one better. Anyway, it was about an hour away from here. He was driving, and he was trying to keep himself awake on the road. He was trying to come up with this song. And he started saying, when he rolls up his sleeves, he ain't just putting on the Ritz. And he thought, these are really silly lyrics. Must have been really late at night. Anyway, when he got to the youth camp, he played it for the kids there, and they really, really liked this song. And by the end of the year, Awesome God was being sung all around the world, and he was suddenly a millionaire. And he was a very humble character and kept true to his word and never saw those millions of dollars because he gave it all away to the poor. And this song kind of reminds me of humility. My dad's going to be on that.
Just a couple of announcements for the upcoming months, actually, because this summer is going to be pretty much the same thing. But we have a couple different Bible study fellowship possibilities. If you are interested, on Sunday evenings, most Sunday evenings, not this one because it's the 5th, but we are doing a Zoom Bible study. Michelle Bullock is coordinating that, so if you're interested, just give Michelle a call and she'll give you the information that you need. And then on Wednesday nights at 7:30, we are meeting at Matt and Aaron Hildbrand's for the Fair Weather Fellowship. So we sit outside, and so we can social distance that way in their nicely shaded backyard. And so if you're interested in that, that's Wednesday at 7:30. And then also, this summer we will continue with the 2 morning services. The 9:30 one will be where Mass are strongly encouraged. And then the 11 o'clock is where Mass are optional. And then also, ladies, next Saturday at 2 o'clock, there is a shower for Lacey Natick. Wedding shower, tea, I'm not sure the proper way to word that, but if you have any questions, Judy, ask Judy. She knows everything. And she's, let her know if you're coming. So, all right.
I'm going to tell you to stand right now so that I don't forget. So if everyone can please stand. I've done it every time so far. We've been missing a lot of things this summer, and one of the things that I personally will miss is the dulcimers coming here, just singing these songs. One of the things they always do is do the power wash medley, they call it. So I figured we'd sing that, and this was last minute, so I don't have any intro here. We have another scripture. Yeah, we do. Okay. James 4:6-10. But he gives us more grace. That is why the scripture says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, you double-minded. Grieve, mourn, and wail. Change your laughter to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up.
If my people's hearts are humble, if they pray and seek my face, if they turn away from evil, I will not withhold my grace. I will hear their prayers from Redeemer and friend. Who would have thought that a lamb could rescue the souls of men? Oh, you rescue the souls of men. Counselor, Comforter, Keeper, Spirit we long to embrace. You offer hope when our hearts are hopelessly lost our way. Oh, we've hopelessly lost our way. You are the one that we praise. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and grace our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always hunger for. Almighty, infinite Father, faithfully loving your own. Here in our weakness you find us, falling before your throne. Oh, we're falling before your throne. You are the one that we praise. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and grace our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always hunger for.
Lord, today we do thank you for the grace that you do offer. We thank you for the hope that you give us. And Lord, especially today, this time of year, we thank you for this nation that you have placed us in. We thank you for the privilege of living in the United States. And we certainly have our problems, but Lord, I thank you that we live in a land where we have the freedoms that we do and the freedom to worship you. And Lord, I just praise you for that. Lord, we do lift up our brothers, our Christian brothers and sisters around the world who are not blessed in that way and live in places that literally worshiping you can put their lives in danger. Lord, I pray that you will continue to give them strength. And Lord, I thank you for the way that you have blessed them and helped them. Lord, I just pray you'll continue to be with them. Lord, we lift up those around us, our friends and our relatives who are struggling with different problems, physical problems, emotional problems. Lord, I just pray that you'll be with them, that you will give the strength and the help that they need. And Lord, I pray that you will help us as your people to be positive witnesses to the world around us, to share the hope that you have placed in us. We ask this in your name. Amen. When we were kids, we used to sing, he's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. And then we learned that he's got you and me, brother, in his hands. He's got you and me, sister, in his hands. We even learned that he had the little bitty baby in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. But when you watch the news lately, you ever start to wonder if God's grip might be slipping? I mean, it's a messed up year. And there's a lot that is going on, and there's a lot that isn't going on. Today is the 5th of July, and yet my dogs are not hiding in the basement because there were no fireworks last night. You know, I mean, there were volunteer ones around, but they didn't have the big boomers that send my dogs cowering. We haven't had youth camps this year. I don't know how we've had summer without having youth camps, but somehow it's come. We should be getting ready for family camp starting this Saturday. That's not going to happen. As David mentioned, we should be having the dulcimer crew coming in and leading in the service, and that's not going to happen. And we should be getting ready for the fair, and that isn't happening. And so many things are not happening, and the school year was messed up. And so many things that we are missing, and that's the COVID problems. And then there's a lot that is going on. You know, we've got financial insecurities, and we've got political intrigue, and we've got civil unrest, and we've got international events. And it's not just out there, it's right here in our church too. And now, in the last 6 months, at most 6 weeks, I think it's in the last month alone. But we have had at least three major surgeries, and the answers to prayer are here this morning. But at least three major surgeries. In addition to those surgeries, we've had at least 6 other people hospitalized. We've had numerous ambulance runs. We've had difficult diagnoses. And that's just for people who regularly attend our church. We have a church of 90 to 100 people. We've had at least 9 people in the hospital in the last month. That's 10% of our attendance. But things have been going tough. And then when you add in our family members, even just our parents and our kids that may not attend with us, those numbers just balloon out. And it's almost enough to make you think that maybe God's grip is slipping a little bit. What is wrong? But God's grip is not slipping. He still has the whole world in his hands. We've been looking at the book of Nehemiah, and the folks that Nehemiah was working with, they would understand a little bit of what we're going through. They didn't have the same situations, but they had the same feelings because they were going through some tough times. The city of Jerusalem, their capital city, was in ruins. The way I picture it is the pictures that we've seen of German cities after World War II, where they had been bombed so completely, and there'd be a few standing walls, but then there would be rubble just everywhere, and the bricks laying out in the streets and that sort of thing. And that's the way Jerusalem looked. When Nehemiah got there, he wanted to take a little ride around the city to kind of see what condition it was in. So we assume it was a donkey that he was on. We don't know for sure, but there were places around the city where he could not even get a donkey through by the walls. There was so much rubble. He wasn't trying to get a car through there. He wasn't even trying to get a Jeep through there. He was just trying to get a donkey through there. And there was so much mess, he couldn't get a donkey through. The city was in sad shape. And the neighboring countries were trying to mess with Israel, trying to keep them weak and dependent on the neighboring countries. And so there was foreign intervention in Israelite internal affairs. And that was just the situation. And it looked rough for the people. And if we kind of look at the whole book of Nehemiah in about 2 minutes, even when things started to go right, when they started to rebuild the walls and things were going better, the opposition to the walls rose faster than the walls did. And the neighboring peoples did their best to stop the Israelites. They started by heckling and hassling the Israelites and telling them that all the work that they were doing was worthless and it would soon fall and that sort of thing. And when that didn't discourage them, then they tried more active methods, such as attempting to assassinate Nehemiah. They threatened and planned military interventions against them, but God did protect them. The military attacks did not occur. But the Israelites were expecting them at all times. And the neighboring countries even went so far as to hire Israelites to spread lies and to spread dissension within Jerusalem. So we get upset about, the foreign governments when we hear about them interfering with our elections and with them putting things on social media to heighten the divisions that occur in our nation. That is nothing new. The neighboring people around Israel were doing that 2,400 years ago. It's just with social media, we have a lot better platforms for doing such a thing now. And so they were trying to do that. And they made life miserable for the Israelites. And I imagine a lot of the Israelites were kind of going, God, what's going on? It kind of feels like things are slipping here. Aren't you paying attention? Because even when they were building the walls, they were doing it under constant threat of military attack. And so they were working on the wall, but they also had to have their weapons right with them. And then when they finished the work for the day, And it's time to just crash. And I'm sure they wanted to go to their homes and just relax and get some rest. Instead, they had to just serve guard duty on the very walls they'd just been building. And they had to sleep right by their little section of wall because they needed the guards there. And it looked nasty. But God still had the whole world in his hands. God was still in control. And when we look at the end of the book, and I know as Christians when we talk about the end of the book, we usually say, Revelation, we win. There are other victories that come before Revelation. Just look at the end of Nehemiah. The end of Nehemiah, the wall has been built, and the Israelites are enjoying greater peace and prosperity than they had enjoyed for 150 years. How did that happen? Because it was a fairly short period of time. How did that happen? I think it's because of Nehemiah's leadership. Nehemiah firmly believed that God was still in control. He still believed that the whole world was in God's hands, that God had a plan for them. And he prayed and he sought God's face and God's will. And when he found what God's will for him was, he then worked at it with his whole heart. He put into practice the very advice that God had given the Israelites 500 years before, when the first temple had been built. God told them that even if the Israelites faced hard times, he said, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and heal their land. That even sounds like it might make a good song, doesn't it? But when God's people act like God's people, he will act on our behalf. And he will bring healing to our land. That is the hope that we have. While we're actually going through it, it's difficult to see. You know, with the COVID slowdown, we've had a lot more free evenings, and that's kind of strange for us. So trying to find things to do a little bit. And I've been watching a lot more old war movies. I enjoy watching the old war movies. And I enjoy especially the ones that try to give a little historical perspective and to show things as they actually occurred. And I'm just amazed over and over at how many little things had to go right for the victory to come. You know, looking at World War II, Hitler was out to destroy the Jews. That was one of his prime goals. And he could have won. But for so many little things, we rewatched the movie Midway not long ago. We've only seen it, 4 or 5, a dozen times. I don't know. We've seen it a few times. But in that one, it was the turning point in the Pacific Theater for us of World War II. A major battle. And yet so many little details had to fall into place for us to be able to win. The Americans were outnumbered, we were outgunned, we should have lost, and yet we had an amazing victory. And just little things, like one of the Japanese scout planes was a half-hour late launching due to mechanical problems. And that one scout plane is the one that ended up spotting the American fleet, getting the information back, but they got the information back a half-hour late. Now, this is a battle that involved dozens of ships, hundreds of planes, thousands of troops and sailors. And one plane being 30 minutes late helped change the course of the battle and give us the victory, because the Japanese did not get the information they needed when they needed it. An amazing coincidence. Or we watched a documentary on Ulysses S. Grant. By the way, just for trivia, S was not his middle initial. That was a misprint on his West Point application. And once the United States Army said, you are Ulysses S. Grant, he became Ulysses S. Grant. But looking at his experiences during the Civil War, there are so many times that the battle could have gone the other way. And slavery could have become the law of the land. I mean, there were so many times. And But just one of them stood out to me, especially, and I can't remember the place name, I'm sorry. It was a 6-hour documentary, and so there were a lot of battles that they talked about, and they all kind of blurred together for me. But there was one, Grant was trying to capture a Confederate fortress, and it was high on the banks overlooking a large river. And they had really good fortifications, and they had a lot of cannons in there that controlled the river and controlled all the approaches. And there was swampland to the north, so Grant could not get his troops in through their fortifications. And so he finally decided that the only thing he could do would be to put his army on riverboats, float them past the fortress, and then land them and attack from the south, from behind the Confederate lines. That was their only chance. The problem was they had discussed this plan before and decided not to do it because they figured it would be a bloodbath. The Confederates were on the high ground and they controlled the river. But Grant was desperate. He said, we're going to try it. And everybody expected that, the Union would go down this far side of the river, as far away from the Confederate guns as they could get. But the Union commander of the naval forces said, no, let's go right up next to those Confederate guns, which sounds stupid. But they went right up on the Confederate bank, right next to the bank. And what they found out is that the Confederate guns couldn't reach low enough to hit them. And they were shooting just over the Union ships. They showed a picture of one of the ships. They were using sails. And the masts and the rigging were riddled from cannon blasts from the Confederate forces. But the deck of the ship where all the troops were, that was untouched because they were shooting just over the top of them. It's an amazing coincidence. And I look at that, and as a Christian, it's like, that's too coincidental to be coincidence. I see God at work. God was helping to bring an end to slavery in our nation, to stop that evil. God was at work helping the people that were doing His will. Now, for the people that were actually going through it, I imagine they had trouble seeing that. There was still great loss on both sides and great sacrifice, and it was a difficult time to be alive. But when we look back with 2020 hindsight, we can see that God was at work. And I do believe that when we look back with 2020 hindsight at the year 2020, we will see God at work. Especially if we, His people who are called by His name, will humble ourselves, will pray, will seek His face, and do His will. We will find that God is at work. And I do encourage you, it will be good, 10 years from now to look back and see how He has been at work. But if we can be looking now, just to see those little God sightings of where He is working among us now. And again, 3 right here this morning. It's so good to see you guys. Answers to prayer. We will see God at work. Because God is in control. As Cindy said, we win. We are on the winning side. That is what gives us hope. Because God's plans will not be thwarted. COVID may knock us down. The economy may mess us up and all that sort of thing. And we may get knocked down. But God will win, and we are on God's side. If we are on God's side, we will win. That is why we have hope. God's grip has not slipped. He still holds the whole world in His hands. That is the hope that we have. And that is the hope that we need to share with our friends around us. Because some of our friends are getting really discouraged. And they need to see the hope that God gives us. Let's stand together for prayer. Lord, I do thank You. Thank You for the hope that You do give us. Lord, I pray that You will help us as Your people to live as Your people so that we can be effective in doing Your will. Lord, I know that You are at work. I know that You will be accomplishing Your plans. And so, Lord, I thank You for what You are doing. And I pray, Lord, that You will help us to share that hope with the people around us. We ask this in Your name.